Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today we are getting into part 8 of the training mistake series talking about triceps. This will be the final part of the training mistake series. Now, unfortunately, Natalie is not with us. I think she is taking her foster dog, soon to be real dog, hopefully, to the vet. So it is Andrew and I today. This should be a fun one though. Per usual, there's going to be a deep dive into the most common training mistakes holding you back from building whatever muscle tissue we're discussing for the day. Today, we are, again, really just going to dive deep into triceps. Now, triceps, I think, an underrated muscle group. If building arms is a priority of yours or just having more shape in your arms in general, for like, I know in your training currently, you said like y'all recently pulled out any like direct arm work, but for a lot of clients, like we mentioned before, we mentioned like, hey, delts are a big part of gating. Like people say, like, I want more defined arms. Delts are part of that. Biceps are part of that. I think triceps are often one that goes neglected though. And when we're looking at like the overall mass of the arm, your triceps do make up a much greater percentage of that than your biceps. So still not something that we want to neglect. Anything else from your end to add on tricep training before we dig in?
I think for like we'll talk about the functional reason why we have this in everybody's training, even for women that don't really care too much about building their triceps. Actually, though, it is interesting. This is one where if I just have like maybe one exercise in somebody's programming, they'll always, or I should say often, will ask like, "Can why don't I have more tricep training in here?" Which is
Oh, really?
interesting. But yeah, I get that a lot. But like for somebody who's really wanting to build up their arms, the triceps actually make up more of the arm mass than biceps do. And I feel like
Hmm.
biceps always get more of the focus whenever somebody's trying to build up their arms.
Absolutely. And truly, like most clients we work with do want a decent amount of arm development, whether they realize it or not. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people, it's not as common anymore, but you used to hear a lot like, well, I don't want my arms to get too bulky. My arms tend to go bulky, which typically means like in reality, like, hey, you might carry, like maybe your body fat storage patterns are more biased to that, which can be common for some. Or we actually just don't really have any muscle there at all to like create any shape. And again, actually building more triceps will help. I for sure in the last year or so have started to program a lot more direct arm work for clients than I used to. I used to be pretty sparse on that. But I do find from the aesthetic perspective, it actually helps support the whole like overall look of like the arm and delt that people want more than I had thought for a while. Also, I'll say like since I have been like practicing the posing side of things more, like doing the side tricep shot, I feel like I have like trying to get that down. I have a whole new appreciation for like trying to develop it a lot more. It's
Yeah.
just not really a muscle you normally look at or see. But I've also mentioned a couple of my female clients, or had a couple of my female clients mention lately, like they want to better develop triceps. So maybe triceps are becoming in vogue. I like it. All right. Anything else before we get into some context setting?
Nope.
Cool. All right, so let's just talk anatomy and function of the triceps so you understand more of the concepts that we discussed later. So your tricep has 3 heads, hence the name tricep, much like triceratops, tricycle, etc. We have the long head, which fittingly named because it is the longest head of the tricep. Now, much like we talked about, the long head of the bicep is a biarticular muscle that crosses both the shoulder joint and the elbow joint and inserts at the scapula. Tricep is cool because it is similar. It crosses both elbow and shoulder joint and also inserts on the scapula. Thus, just like the long head of the bicep has many implications on aiding your shoulder stability, right? So, similar to how we talked about in the bicep episode, not just from an aesthetic perspective, but also like I think people think of biceps and triceps as like the least quote unquote functional muscles there are, which is so funny because so many people also have shoulder issues and like they do play a huge role in supporting shoulder stability, overall shoulder function, and shoulder health. So very important there. And they also aid pulling your arm into shoulder extension. Now we have from there the medial head of the tricep. Basically, the long head is kind of on the back of your tricep. Think of it running, or the back of your arm, the back to the side, but largely the back and like almost the inside part of the back of your arm. Really runs from the shoulder joint basically all the way down to the arm. And then all 3 heads of the tricep converge to a single attachment point on the forearm. Basically, almost like within, like they almost attach to the ball of your forearm, like in that ball and socket joint. but basically they all converge there, but have three separate starting points on either the scapula with the long head or the humerus, the upper arm bone, for the other two heads of the tricep. So again, we have the long head kind of on the back side of the tricep. We have the medial head, which again attaches to more so like the upper to mid part of the upper arm bone. And again, it goes back down to that same, or inserts up there, attaches at the same point as the other tricep heads. This kind of think of like the lower middle tricep. So if you like flex, if you extend your arm, like feel kind of right above your elbow on the bottom middle part of the back of your arm, that is really where your medial head is. And then we have the lateral head, which is again attaching or inserting at the humerus and attaching same point as the other three. That is more so on like the outside of your arm. That's kind of like the little horseshoe thing that sticks out a little bit more, is that lateral head of the tricep. Again, when we're looking at function, the triceps are very similar to the biceps, but essentially work in the opposite direction. So whereas the bicep helps flex the forearm, these help extend the forearm. So basically straightening the elbow. Really the primary function we need to consider when training the triceps. And then they also really help in stabilizing the shoulder, especially when our shoulder or when our elbows, when we are in shoulder extension, when our elbows are back behind our torso. Really big role in shoulder stability there. Any other like additions in terms of function or anatomy you would throw in there?
We're missing Natalie for all of the shoulder stabilization talk, but I would say as long as you just work your triceps in multiple different elbow positions, you're going to be able to hit all three, and you'll have a mixture of like both the aesthetics and the function benefits of them.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. I think I mean, it's really, unless you're really, really prioritizing triceps, honestly, even then, like tricep training is pretty easy. So I think getting into our favorite tricep movements and the common mistakes we see will really kind of be a good way to clarify this alongside what we're talking about here. So in terms of favorite movements, I would like to nominate, I'm going to throw these both out there at once: a single arm cable overhead extension and a crossbody tricep pushdown. So reasoning for these being, when we're looking at our tricep training, I would say like some variation of those two is probably going to be like almost always what I'm going to rock with. Now, when we're looking at these are long head of the tricep bias movements. So that single arm cable overhead extension, or this could be a cross cable overhead extension. I personally find with like the setting of the cross cables, that's where like that can get a little bit tricky. I really like an overhead from a positioning perspective as well. I really like a single arm overhead extension. That arm, not necessarily overhead, but your elbow lifted. It's kind of like the high cable curl position almost, or quite similar. We're going to be in that scapular plane. The elbow is going to be lifted, probably going to be at least a bit over shoulder height, and we're reaching back behind us to pull a cable from like the middle of our back and extending. That is going to really challenge the long head of the tricep in the lengthen range. Your crossbody tricep pushdown, we are holding two cables. They are crossing. We're like standing in front of a functional trainer. We're pressing them down. They cross, we're pressing down and slightly outward. Now this is going to train the long head of the triceps, challenge the most in the more shortened position typically. Going to depend on how close we're standing to the cables, but basically for us to achieve the shortest position possible, we need a little bit of shoulder extension. So elbows need to be like a bit behind the torso. So this will be like a more short biased. To fully stretch, again, we need that arm more up overhead. Now from there, when we're looking at like, okay, how many like do I need to focus on lateral head, medial head, and long head? Really, the long head of the tricep makes up the majority of the muscle mass of the triceps. And anytime we're extending at the elbow, you're going to be training all three divisions of the triceps to a degree. Your lateral head and medial head are also trained pretty well with any presses. And again, like they're all working. So typically when we do extension, but your long head doesn't work as much with a lot of our more press specific work. So really, my thought is, like how I approach this is typically if we just set things up to bias the long head, all the triceps are going to be developed well developed well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
So basically we're just focusing on like hey, what's going to be optimal for a long head, which is basically going to be like elbows by your side to slightly behind you, some type of push down, some type of overhead extension typically is going to be like my two goes tos.
Mhm.
From like,
I use
go ahead.
really similar movements. Like basically just slightly different variations are typically my go-tos of like I will usually use a double arm overhead extension on the cable and then usually like a single arm tricep extension with the elbow down to the side or just the rope tricep push down for a lot of people. And that's a lot of it is it depends on the person and their setup, but also just like the time that they have to devote to arm work, which really you don't have to rest between. So you would just take that rest time. But a lot of times with arms, I'll be using those as an opportunity to superset with something else like biceps or potentially like a lateral raise just for time's sake.
Yeah, that was a note that I left as well, where it's more so like I would consider those my like most optimal. Like those are what I'm going to do in my own training or for someone who has plenty of time. But a lot of times I will choose a simpler variation of the same, right? Like it might be an easy bar cable push down, a straight bar cable push down, a rope tricep push down, an easy bar overhead extension or a rope overhead extension. I might rock with one of those because those are like depending on the client's level, like a crossbody overhead cable head extension, they might not be able to execute that well, and I might just like, hey, we're gonna get it better. We can get to the point of progress sooner by us going with like this very simple just rope overhead extension and get like 80 to 90% of the optimality. And then over time, as I get more advanced, I can move them on to this more complex variation. So a lot of times I won't start with that. But again, I'm just going to be like some variation of that, basically like a push down and overhead extension. When it comes to like, let's start with an overhead extension. What are the most common mistakes you see there? Like, what are the things you're most often having to fix with clients?
Rib cage position is a huge one. If somebody doesn't have access to that overhead mobility, then they're going to compensate by just like elevating their chest instead of getting the arms fully overhead. This is one where I've used it to improve overhead mobility for some people because it kind of like can force you into that position, and then when you're lengthening and shortening the tricep in that position, it helps to like reinforce that that position that is trickier for people to get into. But at first, it is some troubleshooting of like, okay, now that we're in this overhead position, now crunch your ribs down and let's maintain that position throughout.
Yeah, that is the ribcage flare is a very common one. And I think as well, I typically cue people to, so when we're getting into the position, let's just say we're doing a single arm overhead cable extension. We want to be in the scapular plane, so that like upper arm positioning is an important one. I really an easy way to kind of frame it is basically it should be like right along the ridge of the rear delt. Humor is basically it's lined up with that. Or again, I think the scapular plane might actually be an easier way to think of it. Like again, I really like the N1, like put your elbow next to your side, externally rotate as much as you can until you start to really get into some resistance, and then just extend your arm out from there. That is going to kind of be the scapular plane that we're in when we are doing an overhead extension like this. Now, similarly there, you will start to feel like when we're coming up overhead, there will be a point where you really start to run into some resistance where I really can't go any higher with my elbow without my rib cage really flaring up, right? And if you're just letting that cable pull you like way up overhead into this position you don't have access to, like we can lean into that and push our range a little bit, but we don't want to let it like pull us way back passively to where we're like way up here if normally we only have access to like here. I think sometimes people try to like force their elbow way too high overhead, kind of out of the active range of motion they can really access.
Yeah,
I would
like
say
trying
another,
to get more length. Like
yeah,
I think that trying to get everything in its most lengthened position to train it there is probably a big part of that.
for sure. And similarly, not really controlling that lengthen when they are there. I see that a lot with like the overhead extension, especially. It's again, that last bit is kind of just like they let the cable pull the elbow back. They're just dropping into that and launching back up. We really want to be actively using our tricep to resist that descent, just maintaining tension the entire time there. Another alongside that, if we're doing like a cross cable overhead extension or a cross cable push down, is the cable should be running directly over the upper arm. So basically, when I extend my arm on a overhead extension, the cable should be running like right over the top of my arm, right in line with it. So this is where like a lot of times if you're using a single arm, you'll need to like shift your body positioning, or if we are using like dual cables, we'll need to stand closer or further from the functional trainer to get the cables to line up and run right over our arms. And again, same thing goes for like a crossbody push down. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Cool.
So with a functional trainer, you can typically raise or lower the arms, or like the the ones like you and I have, well, I guess you used to have, where you can just slide it up and down. You'll set that like just over your shoulder so that whenever your arm is extended, right, then it's in line.
Yeah, correct, correct. And then like, but also like, let's say that if I'm extending like, again, we want basically the line of the cable to be right over the line of your arm, your upper arm bone, right? So if the cable is like running way outside of my upper arm, I need
Oh
to
yeah.
shift my positioning and either step under that cable if I am doing a single arm, or what you could do if you have a functional trainer where the arms don't adjust inwards or outwards is you could take a step or two forward, and that would again line the cables up better. Anything else with overhead extensions you typically see? I really again see a lot of times just sorry just keep this. I really see a lot of times though people just at the bottom of the range when they're getting that lengthened, not controlling that and just like letting the weight passively push them down further and further,
Yeah.
where your actual range of motion on the tricep there won't be quite as much as the actual stretch we can get. Like stop within what we can control and extend. Don't just let the weight passively pull you down.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything else on that one.
Okay, what about push downs? Anything common you see
For
there?
cable pushdowns.
Mm-hmm.
um, Letting your elbows just sort of go all over the place, either forward or back or out, flaring out too far. You kind of want to just keep your elbow in a fixed position because I can't remember what I think the hamstrings is where we talked about this, but when you have the like each end of the tricep, you want to keep one end fixed, and that one end being your elbow. So if we have the elbow moving along with the cable, then you're moving both ends of the tricep, and so you're not getting a full stretch or full shortening.
Yeah, similar to what we were talking about if you're moving like your hips back and your knees back on RDL.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that is very common. Basically, what we want, if we're doing like a crossbody push down, a straight bar push down, whatever it may be, we want a neutral shoulder position. So we don't want our shoulder blades really squeezed together, nor do we really want them protracted. Basically, just want neutral. Then create some tension and stability in your upper back. We really want to keep our upper arm fixed. But I think like as long as we're lining the cables up well, it's pretty simple. Like it is slightly more rather than just pushing straight down like that crossbody push down, it is slightly more of a push out to the side to again I line things up ideally, but a straight bar push down or like some type of straight like just straight push down works. We're like 90-95% of the way there regardless. Um, I would say there, yeah, the elbows are a very common one I see. A lot of times when I program like an easy bar, like push down for someone or a rope push down, what I'll see is people almost turn it into like a lat pullover. And they send me the videos and be like, hey, here's my tricep pullover. It's like, wait, let's clear this up. Where it's as we're coming up, your elbows are coming way forward. And then we're pulling our elbows back and then extending, where again, we're getting a lot of other tissues involved there. Really just a good rule of thumb. Again, just basically keep your elbows by your sides. Similar on that one, a lot of times what I see is just no control of the negative. People just like let the weight pull them up. It just like launches them up and then they push it down, right? Where you use your triceps to resist. The range of motion will be a little bit shorter, right? There will be a certain point where for us to go any higher, our elbows just have to come forward. We want to stop before that point. Um, and then I really like the cue rather than, I think a lot of times people think like pushing down and just like lean their weight forward over it. Like if we're doing an easy bar push down, don't think about that. I think about like pushing that weight in arc back towards your thighs.
Yeah, I like that. I will use on a straight bar push down. I'll almost have it more like a dip where I will have
I've
them
done
bring
that
their
from time to
elbows
time
back.
too.
But aside from that, yeah, like on all of these other types of push downs, you just it's not a long range of motion, so you don't have to try and over exaggerate that. Your tricep is not a huge muscle, so just basically just your forearms should be moving.
Your triceps are a huge muscle, Andrea, but the rest of us aren't. Anything else there before we move on?
No. I this is one where I think that people don't go heavy enough a lot of times.
Oh yeah,
Which I mean, we could say that about a lot of different movements, but it's okay to push these and really like grind at the end of them. I don't
I've
see that a
noticed that a
lot.
ton lately, though. Yeah, it's a pandemic where it's like, why are this? And I think like relatively, triceps are probably like the least fatiguing. I honestly think triceps might be one of the least fatiguing. If we're like looking at like a push down or overhead extension, it's like one of the least fatiguing movements we could do. Like, why do we have 5 reps in the tank still at the end of this set? It is funny how consistently I've noticed that as of late, especially. Another big one for me, I would say my other favorite in terms of triceps is dips. I'm a huge dip fan. Always have been though. Always really love dips, but gonna be another good movement for us challenging the long head. Um, and as a whole, just a very good integrated movement for, I mean, building pecs, delts, triceps. I I didn't been doing dips twice a week for the last like 12 weeks now. Love it. It's the best. Um, so I'm a big fan of dips. We talked about this in the pec training episode as well. From like even for like a lot of female clients, it's a really good like, hey, we're getting some pec in here. We're also getting a lot of delt and we're getting a lot of tricep all at once. But again, as a whole overall mass builder, but for triceps as well. I also really like a dip machine. If someone just can't do dips, or if it's just in a way that I want to drive more volume, I'm a big fan of a dip machine also. Agreed on all that?
Yeah, and it keeps them more strict. A body weight dip or a weighted dip is a little bit harder for some people to stay strict just because of the your torso isn't supported. I guess it's what like a closed chain movement instead of open chain. So a seated dip machine keeps those more strict if somebody isn't strong enough to control their body position. So I like them for that reason too.
A seated dip machine, we can typically, now it depends on the dip machine. Like the prime one, we can almost emulate a dip. But if you have like your like, I mean, how depending on how well you know your dip machines, if you have like a Life Fitness dip machine, the ones that like have the back support that have you leaning forward more, we can almost make it a lot more specific to the tricep. Or like the Atlantis dip machine is another one like this. You can make it a lot more specific to the tricep where you can really just drive that elbow way back and get a lot of like, really, really good tricep extension. Um, with the dips, let's talk actual dips first before we talk about like dip machine. I mean, this is one where first you're just way stronger than you expect. A lot of it is just mental. It's quite similar to pull-ups, but honestly, I find like people can get to doing cranking out dips a lot sooner than pull-ups. It's just like a weird foreign movement for a lot of people. And it is a funny one because dips are one where like if we fail, like you just land on the ground like a foot
Just
below you.
put your feet down. It's kind of like starting to drown in the kiddie pool.
But now that said, like it's super normal. I like, almost everyone who I initially implement dips with, it's like they're so timid initially to do it, and it's like they try, they go down like an inch or two, and they get a little shaky and stop. Which that shakiness is just your nervous system isn't used to the movement. We're not good. We're not skilled or coordinated at this movement yet, and it can kind of freak people out. But it's like, hey, just stick with it. Just keep trying. I promise you, you are like already at the point where you can do a couple of these, and then people are cranking them out pretty quickly. But just being okay with that. Now, we also want to set your dip up to where at the bottom of the rep, your elbow is stacked right over your wrist. So that's really how we determine what are like, because most dip bars will be like a V shape rather than just straight. That will really help you determine where your hand positioning should be. What other, do you coach dips a whole lot?
A fair amount. I'll
Okay.
typically program them for more of like the shoulder function side of things.
Okay.
Um, I think one. one common thing that I'll see is completely collapsing your scaps together at the bottom, rather than leaving a little bit of space there, which you kind of mentioned a little bit, I think. That's pretty common. And I think it's just like I see the same thing on push-ups. I think it's just like not really knowing that you're supposed to not do that. Like I think it feels kind of natural to try and spread your shoulders as far apart at the bottom, and to do that you kind of squeeze your shoulder blades back.
Hmm.
But in order to maintain just that tension and actually have the tension stay on your chest, you want to leave that little bit of space.
Yeah, no, that's quite similar to like our other presses, right? You don't want your
Yeah.
shoulder blades just collapse together. A lot of times people will just kind of basically just don't let yourself just shrug up and back unless your shoulder blades just be like naturally pushed there. We want to resist that and really kind of keep the shoulders stable. Your shoulder blades should be moving and they will be moving, that's fine. But we want to maintain some tension there. And then similarly, you don't want to go to the point where like we want to get to a full range of motion, which will typically for most people be like upper arm is parallel to the floor. But we don't want to get to the point where your shoulders are really having to roll forward. And again, like in this case, that'll kind of manifest as more shrugging up typically for us to continue to go any lower. Alongside that, a lot of times what I see is when someone's coming up from the bottom of a dip, so typically we'll have like a slight forward lean. And then what they'll do when they're trying to come up is they'll throw their head back as they push up and kind of shift their weight, which kind of kicks your legs forward underneath you a bit more. So really just we don't want to like try to throw ourselves back up into it. I don't actually know what we're trying to compensate with there. Like why is that that's such a thing?
I don't know, it's almost turning it into like a tricep extension.
Hmm. Okay.
I mean it's just easier.
Yeah. Basically, we're trying to shift momentum, throw ourselves up, but it's counterproductive to the goal, right? We want to keep tension on triceps, chest, delts. So maintain that bit of body position, drive hard through the hands. Um, Past that with your dips, again, they're one that's really like pretty simple if you just set it up well. Super fun too once you get to the point where you're doing like weighted dips. Anything else on those before we move on?
No.
Anything you would add with like a now with like a dip machine, depending on the dip machine, again, if it's one where you have like the back pad that has you leaning forward, you won't have your elbows stacked over your wrist at the bottom. That's or at the top of the rep. You won't have your elbows stacked up at where the movement's the hardest, basically. Your elbows will be behind your wrist more is basically what I'm trying to say. I'm getting super in my head about this. But and it will again depend more on like the machine, but typically that's not something I would be as worried about with the machine. Um any other considerations there that you haven't mentioned? A lot of times people have those handles a little bit too wide, where
Yeah,
like
you
they
can
have the
usually
handles that'll
rotate
flip
them.
in or out. Yeah.
Hmm.
Some people will have those handles too wide to where their elbows are like flared way outside of their wrist and their shoulders. And I would typically want this to be like we're pretty close to elbows directly behind our wrist and right about shoulder width, like a little bit wider, maybe shoulder width to a little bit wider. But we don't want it to be like way far outside of us. That's typically where people get some elbow pain with this as well.
Yeah, I'd say the most common mistake is probably the same as on the dips where you let your shoulders roll forward at the top or at the
Hmm.
top. That's pretty much it. This one, I mean, it's a machine. It's pretty just like plug and play. So that's the biggest mistake I think I see.
Cool. In terms of tricep movements, anything else that you would like to nominate?
I'm typically not programming a ton of triceps. I think that we covered the ones that I most often use. If somebody has a cool machine that just fits them really well, that they like to use, we might sometimes use that, but we covered the ones that I use.
Yeah, I again like this is going to be quite commonly what I will do. Even in my current programming, like my triceps are a big priority for me currently. And my tricep work is, let's see, I have dips twice a week. I have an easy bar push down, I have a crossbody push down, and I have a single arm cable overhead extension. Right? And triceps are like one of the biggest priorities in my training right now. So even then it's like I would say the only other thing I would throw out there I do really like is I like a JM press as well. Specifically, I really like a Smith machine jam press. Or you can also, if you have the right like chest press machine, like Jim Lecco has like the standing chest press machine, very niche thing. But if you have the right chest press machine that's quite narrow, you can actually do, and it's like a pretty horizontal path that the chest press machine travels in. You can also do a jam press on that. I do really like a jam press as another tricep option. Man, past that,
I like those in theory. I just don't use them or do them myself.
there's very few people who, again, like a couple of my guys who are a little bit more advanced in arms are more of a priority I'll program them for. But past that, they're not ones that I program a tremendous amount either. I find they are just a little bit trickier as well for people to execute, and like not going to be one of my staples for most. But I do like them.
I will add an incline dumbbell skull crusher for people who have limited equipment is one
I
I
like
use
it.
pretty often. Yeah.
Almost to like replace like that cable overhead extension. Then I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. That's really probably the main movement I use in a home gym setup, other than maybe like a band push down, so you can get more of the elbows next to your side position. But like a dumbbell kickback is just not something I ever use. I just hate that movement. So
I would agree. Yeah.
yeah.
That's typically going to be my go-to as well if like someone doesn't have any of the others available. It's I like it. I like if someone has it. Like I like that with an easy curl bar as well.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has it, or even like you can do like your cable overhead extension with like the easy bar like that also. I do like there's like the Panada or like the we have a Body Masters overhead extension that has like the easy bar like handle. That's like an
Yeah,
overhead
we have the
extension.
Arsenal one.
How's that one?
I tried it once just to feel it out. It's all right.
I
It
do like
gets
the
you
Body Masters
pretty
one.
overhead, like a little bit too exaggerated.
That's when I've never used that one, but I've programmed it for clients, and like getting people in the right position with that, I found to be a little bit more of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Just like relative to the see how high that pivot point is set up. Cool. Um, Anything else then in terms of triceps?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Well, again, triceps, honestly pretty simple. Understanding the setup and the execution takes a little bit more time, but the actual like amount of exercises we select doesn't need to be crazy broad. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Get some sick tries. Happy New Year to everyone. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you would like to apply for coaching with the team, click the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.